Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and on this show of Dollars and Cents, I'm going to first deconstruct money, then I'm going to deconstruct reality. And so implicit in that is that money and reality are not what you expect them to be or know them to be. And I hope to convey this in this show. So to start out with money, first of all, I want to discuss what money is and where it came from and where we are today. First of all, throughout history, money has been generally gold and silver. This coin here is gold, all right? This coin here is silver. Now, what happened is that this is the way it was. Not necessarily gold and silver, but it was something of positive value. Because what else were you going to give something away to someone else or in exchange something else unless it had value? All right? And throughout history, gold and silver have been considered money. And this was alongside cattle, salt, shells, whatever else the population considered to be of value. Something of positive value that they would change for it. The first big change happened in China with money. And it was there that paper money first appeared in the year 12,023-24 in the province of Sichuan. Now what happened was this. There was a shortage of copper. And copper coins, I don't know why they ran out of copper, but there was a shortage of copper. So some bright, soul just thought, well, let's substitute lead, right? And so they did. So the provincial government in Sichuan, China, in around 1223-24, started minting lead coins. Well, the relative value between lead and copper was huge, all right? And so what happened is that the lead coins got so heavy that rather than exchanging the lead coins, the local population started depositing these lead coins at money shops. And they would get these receipts, all right, for the lead coins. You'd get a receipt maybe for 10 or 20 or 100 of them. And they began passing these coins to these receipts to each other as coins, as money. For example, if I had on deposit at the money shop 10 coins of copper and I needed to buy something, I could just give you my receipt and you could then, you knew this was money, I had a receipt at the coin shop, and go on and this became money, the receipts at the coin shop. And this was all well and good until, of course, the coin shops began issuing, realizing what was happening, began issuing receipts for coins that weren't there. All right? Now, you could see why this was in the coin shop's best interest. They realized quite soon that their receipts were being treated as money. And their receipts were being treated as money, and so if they issued more receipts on that they said they had coins on, they could spend these with other people because they're being accepted as money. Well, I don't know if one coin shop started doing it first, but soon after that, the other coin shops started doing it, and pretty soon you had an inflationary explosion in receipts at the coin shops. The collapse of the economy in Sichuan happened very quickly, and the central government sent in people, to see what was going on, why it had fallen apart, and they came to Sichuan, and the central government said, okay, it's over. Stop everything. You can only use our coins. This is it. And to restore order, that's what they did. So I think it only lasted for a year or 2 years in Sichuan, and they came back and reported to the central government what had happened. Well, the central government in China realized what they could do with this, what paper money could do. So 2 years later, the central government, I think it was the Sung Dynasty, it wasn't the Sung Dynasty, but the central government came up and said, all right, the Qin Dynasty, that's what it was. They said, all right, we're the only ones that can issue paper money at this time. All right? And blah, 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 blah. Now, why did the Chinese government do this? Because the Chinese government realized that if you could actually pass off paper as money, and the government could do this because they had the power, then the government could spend money that they didn't have. And this is what they did. The Qin government came in and they decided that they were going to have 28% backing for their paper money. All right? They said, now, if you have our paper, you can come back to the government and we'll exchange it for you. Well, they knew that once this money went into circulation, unless they had a need to get the original copper backing for the coins, they were just going to be passing this around as paper money as it was. And so the advantage to the government was, with approximately 28% backing, they could have, it's like Hamburger Helper, they could get 72% more purchasing power under this regime of paper money. And so it was. But the thing about government is this. You give government an inch, they're going to take 2, 3, 4, and pretty soon you've got the proverbial mile. And so it was in China. That the 72% extra spending power that they had using paper money wasn't quite enough. It may have been enough for the first 10 years, first 20 years, but after the next 30, 40 years, the Chinese government, whatever the dynasty was, started spending more and more and more. Why? Because they could. Well, what happened is, after the first 30 or 40 years, the government in power started printing more and more paper money. The government fell because of economic chaos. Another government came in, took over, did the same thing. It fell. Chaos, economic chaos. Another government came in, printed more paper money. It fell, more chaos, until 1661, approximately 440 years later, after the first Chinese dynasty started issuing paper money, the last Chinese dynasty, the Manchus, said, this is it. We're not going to do this anymore. We're going to outlaw paper money. This was the Qing dynasty, all right? The first Chinese dynasty that issued paper money, I believe, was the Qin, followed by the Sung, followed by the Manchus, and then finally the last one that had really never issued paper money, all right, said, they issued it once when there was a monetary crisis, and only issued it long enough for the crises to calm down. And then they said in 1661, paper money is going to forever be outlawed in China. And so it was. Then. Now, across the world, in the West, which had never had paper money, in fact, only heard about it through Marco Polo, in his stories when he had returned from China, and basically people thought this was crazy. Marco Polo brought back 2 stories about when he and his uncles went to China that nobody really believed. The first story was that they burned black rocks for heat. All right? Now, this is his experience. Well, the black rocks that Marco Polo talked about was coal. Now, they didn't know about coal in the West at this time. So the idea that the Chinese burned black rocks for heat and energy made no sense to them at all. The second thing that Marco Polo told them about his wondrous journey to the East was they used paper instead of gold and silver as money. Now, this was even more absurd to the Western world than burning black rocks. All right? In fact, when Marco Polo and his uncles returned to the West from China, the Mongol emperor had given them 2 camels loaded down with Chinese money, paper money. They arrived back in Venice. The rulers of Venice saw this stuff, and they looked at it. They had a council, and they agreed that this had to be the work of the devil, and they burned it. All right? It was a gift from the Mongol emperor of China. The Westerners burned this stuff. A couple hundred years or 100 years later, the Mongols came in, and not because they had been insulted by the burning of this paper money. They just wanted to take over the rest of the world, and they sent their troops in. They burned village after village, city after city, and just basically decimated everything between them and Western Europe, Poland, etc. And they would have taken out totally Europe itself, except one of the Mongol Khans had died, and the Mongol hordes, the armies, turned around and went back to China. All right? This is what happened. Well, we're talking about money here. So by 1661, the Qing dynasty, the Manchus, had come in, a couple dynasties after the Mongols, and totally outlawed paper money. They realized after 420 years, this thing, it was tempting, but they had managed to resist its temptations. They never issued paper money, except, I said, in that one rare instance. And in China, at the time, what was used as money was pure silver ingots. All right, by weight. They were called taels, T-A-E-L. So all over China, money was not issued by the government. You had a stable form of money because it was silver. And everywhere over China, people would weigh this, they knew it, and you had a stable reality, which the Chinese were looking for. The Chinese were really looking for stability. They found it. They didn't issue it. The people started doing their own, and they started doing it. Well, what happened in the West? All right? In the West, all of a sudden, you had still gold and silver. There they are. The bigger coin is silver. The smaller coin is gold. All right? Now, what the bankers did, they were the ones who issued paper money in the West. It had never been issued before. And what the bankers did, they went to King William in England in 1692-93, and they made him an offer. And they said this: if you let us issue paper currencies, banknotes, backed by gold. I mean, we're not just going to print this out of thin air. We're going to back it with gold. All right? If you allow us to do this and circulate these as banknotes, we will loan you enough money to pay off your war debts, which are considerable. At the time, King William III was almost broke. He was broke. He was technically bankrupt because of his debts. And so these bankers came to him and made an offer he could not refuse. So that's what he did. He gave the bankers the right to issue banknotes backed by gold and or silver in return for a loan to pay off his war debts. This was and he chartered under this condition the Bank of England. Now, what most people don't know is that original charter did not give the Bank of England the right to circulate these banknotes as money throughout the kingdom. But let me tell you what happened. As soon as he signed off on it, those banknotes started floating around, and pretty soon, commerce, they started being traded as money and passed around as money in England. Well, the cat was out of the bag. The king was happy because he could go to war on credit, all right? And he was off to the races. He was the only king on the planet that could go to war on credit, and within 150 years, this ability gave England, this small little island off the coast of Europe, much smaller than as a kingdom as France and Germany, took over the whole world based on their ability to go to war on credit. So this is the deal. But I want to tell you something about what he did. You see those two coins? They have positive value. All right? These coins are based on savings and value that's intrinsic in the coin. The smaller coin is worth far more than the larger coin. Why? The smaller coin is made of 0.999 gold. All right? This larger coin, which is an Australian coin, silver coin, is made of silver. All right? And even though it's larger, it's worth far less because gold is worth far more than silver. Now, what did the bankers do? Well, I want to show you. The bankers issued a form of money, all right? They issued a form of money that was this, all right? A later version of it. a later banknote. All right? This banknote was a piece of paper. Now, what did this paper represent? Well, you could, in the early days, take this piece of paper issued by the Bank of England and go to the Bank of England and get gold and silver for it. This is why you knew it was valuable. Without this backing of gold and silver, this piece of paper was just a piece of paper with some printing on it, which, as the Chinese had discovered, eventually the people went, you know, because they had blown it by overprinting this paper money, you had hyperinflation and it would collapse. Now, who was doing what? In China, it was the government that was printing this paper money, and they kept printing it and printing it and printing it until it became virtually worthless because there was no limit to what they could consider they could spend this paper money on. And so they did until they destroyed the value of the currency. In the West, those who issued the paper money wasn't the government. Who was issuing the paper money was the Bank of England, the bankers. And what the bankers were after was the interest that they could live by passing off this paper as real money. Now, was it real money? No. The real money were the coins, the gold and silver coins, which were issued alongside the Bank of England's paper money. But because of their deal with the government, with the king and the king and queens of England, the Bank of England was able to pass off their paper as real money. And the difference was this. They lived off the credit, the interest that they charged for the issuance of this money, of this paper money. Now, who was the biggest debtor? It was the king. It was the government of England, which was always at war. In fact, it was busily taking over the rest of the world. All right, after 1694, 1700s, 1800s was the decade and a half of 2 decades basically of English imperialism, where they eventually had the greatest empire since Rome, built on credit and debt. All right, and as long as it expanded, they were certainly happy because they were living off the wealth of the governments, which had to pay them interest. The only government, the major government that they couldn't do this to was in the United States. Why? Because the colonies of the United States had risen up in revolt against England, and threw out not only England, they threw out the Bank of England, and they put in their own banking system. All right? Their banking system was this: coins, gold and silver, or paper money backed by those coins of species. All right? This is what they had, the United States had. All right? Now, what we had was England took this concept of paper money and took over the world. The bankers were happy. They were pigs at the trough. They kept loaning money to the banks of England, to the governments, which had to borrow this paper money from them. They charged interest on it as if it were real money. And the bankers were basically running a scheme. All right? It was a Ponzi scheme. As long as you could pay the debts back, they were happy. They could retire and issue more loans and more loans and more loans. All right? Who were the participants in this party? Bankers, they were in it for profit. Government, they were in it for power. And as long as the governments could say this was money, the bankers could issue these loans and indebt everybody on the way to the bank, which is what they did. Now, what happened was this. The bankers really were in league with government. And what happened is, all of a sudden, government got greedy. Now, when governments get greedy, what do they do with it? They just want power. And when it got away from them, and it got away from them in the United States with the Federal Reserve, all right? The Federal Reserve was the bankers, all right? After the United States had a revolution throughout the bankers in 1913, the central bank, the bankers in England and in Europe got together and they convinced the United States that they needed a private bank, and they did the same thing in the United States that they had done in England. They issued money in the form of paper as real money. Now, what did this look like? Well, it looked like first the Queen of England, then it looked like the euro, then it looked like, let me put it up here, I'm bowing down, da-da-da-da-da, okay, here we go. I know you can't see me, but you're going to see this happening over there. This is what we've got. All right? A little sloppy, but this is what money is. All right? You now had gold and silver alongside all this other paper. And what happened? Boom. What happened is the gold and silver disappeared. And all you had was paper money. Why? Because bad money drives out good. And so after a couple hundred years, there was no gold and silver left. All you had was paper money. And in the United States, the military boys, the government, they wanted to take over the world. All right? They had no long-standing relationship with the bankers, with paper money like the British did. And so what they did was they took over the rest of the world using this paper money as if it were real money and spent so much of it. They spent so much of this money that what happened is that the government of the United States went bankrupt, technically bankrupt, de jure, not de facto, all right? Because de facto, they kept operating like they weren't bankrupt. They kept issuing more and more money. Now, the world had gotten used to the United States money as being as good as gold, because that was the same. The dollar was as good as gold. And at one point, it was because it was convertible to gold. Now, there's a saying out there. Gold is the money of kings. Silver is the money of commerce. And this, debt, is the money of slaves. What do you have? Who are you? All right? Not only is debt the money of slaves, it's now the money of commerce, and it's now the money of nations. The governments have indebted nations, commerce, and individuals with their paper money. Where is the real money? Gone into hiding. Gold. This is a .999 gold coin. All right? This is the .999 silver coin. This is paper. $20 note, 5-pound English pound note, a 10 soles Peruvian note. All right? And what would you rather have? Would you have this? Or would you rather have this silver or this gold? It's clear. The debasement of paper money happened. What you consider money is far different than what you thought it was. What you really have when you're spending this, writing checks, wiring it, or whatever you're doing, I don't care if it's worth $1 or 20 million or 10 million or a trillion. All it is debt in motion. Money issued from a central bank is issued in the form of loans, and all it is debt in motion. This is what money is. This is the deconstruction of money. At one time, that it was something else, and now it isn't. The whole world is floating on a foundation of debt. Well, I hope you learned something. Now, it doesn't change anything, but I told you this because it is changing. Because the amount of debt that the central banks have issued, indebting governments first, commerce second, and you, the individuals, later, they finally got down to the dregs at the bottom and figured if they charged you enough interest, it would cover the probability of your default. What the bankers never figured on was one day it was all going to default. And this is where we are today. In this program, I have deconstructed money. In the next program, I'm going to deconstruct reality. Both of those are about to implode. Both of those are to give way to a true reality, both money and reality. All right? It is about to happen. We are almost there. Welcome to the new world that's coming. The old world is passing away. It's a matter of time. It's not a matter of a choice that you have made, except perhaps to be here at this time. And so, this is what we have. Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and on this show, I'm going to deconstruct reality. On the previous show, I deconstructed money, and I hope to your satisfaction. And what I forgot to do was to give you two reference books that these aren't the usual books that you can go up on Amazon, you can go to your local bookstore and find books about money. But these two books are really, really quite different. And I think they give you the point of view about money that these other books don't, and hopefully a little more insightful. The first book is a book put together by my friend Ralph Foster, and it's called Fiat Paper Money. I ran across this book because when I started investigating money and economics, I read an article by a person I highly respect. His name is John Williams. John Williams is the publisher of a website called www.shadowstats.com. And his claim to significance is that what he did was, when the United States started messing around with and manipulating the numbers for CPI, for inflation, for employment, for any of the other markers which you can measure economic reality, quote, by, he went back to the original ways of measuring them. And what you could see is that he'll give you a thing about inflation, the government's figures, and then you'll get his figures, which were the original way of measuring consumer price index before the government started messing with them. All right? So on the government figures that are going like this with inflation, the shadow stats numbers go like this. And that's the original way that the government started measuring inflation. Same thing with employment. By the U.S. figures, unemployment rates are falling. And they're falling because they eliminated everybody who quit looking for a job after 2 years. All right? So real unemployment rates are going like this, but if you listen to the government, they're going like that. All right? Because he had the wherewithal, the dedication, and the background to do it, he was an accountant, he certainly had my respect and the respect of a number of other people who were watching. All right? Well, what he did was, in this article, he mentioned one book in terms of a reference, and it was this book, The History of Fiat Money by Ralph Foster. Ralph is a friend of mine. He's a coin dealer out of Berkeley, and what he did was this. As he was watching this charade of money going on, Ralph decided to make use of an asset that was in abundance at Berkeley. It was all these graduate students who were working on their masters and doctorates, whether or not the university was ever going to give it to them. They held it out like a carrot on a stick, and they got these people to do all their research. They got these people to teach the classes, and the PhDs at Berkeley. It was a PhD mill with not that many doctorates given out. A lot more students were out there trying to get these advanced degrees than they were handing them out. This is how the industry of education works. Well, what Ralph did is he put an ad in the newspaper and said, listen, I'm looking for some graduate students. I'll pay you so much an hour, and this is the areas in which I want work done, which was the history of paper money in all these nations. And that's what this extraordinary book is all about. It's the history of fiat paper money, all right, that nobody else had done, because the truth of the matter is the people who control banking, the people who control money, don't want the history known, and so it isn't. All right? Ralph did all of us an extraordinary favor. My suggestion to you is go up in the web. You can go to my website because you can order from my website. You go up to Amazon. But it's History of Paper Money by Ralph Foster. And I think his full title is The History and Evolution of Our Currency. Extraordinary, extraordinary book. Another book on a much lighter vein is by Terry Pratchett called Making Money. And this book is fiction, all right? Ralph's book is nonfiction. But you'll find this book under fiction. And in fact, Terry Pratchett writes a lot for kids. This is not written for kids. It's written tongue-in-cheek with so many insights about real money because basically it's a charade. This is another side to The Wizard of Oz, which was also written about money. The gold, but I would recommend, for a lighter vein, but with a lot of truths about money today, read this book, Terry Pratchett, called Making Money. Well, that was what I did in my last program of Dollars and Cents, what I call Deconstructing Money. In this program, I want to deconstruct reality. And so what I want to do is, as I talked about the history of money, I want to talk about how reality is constructed. Just like I went in the last program and talked about how money was constructed. First, it went from something of value, gold and silver. It went to paper money as issued by the Chinese government in 1224 as a hamburger helper, much just to extend the ability of the Chinese dynasties to spend what they didn't have, and they always want to do it. And it collapsed dynasty after dynasty after dynasty for the next 440 years until the Qing dynasty, the Manchus, outlawed it once and for all, or so they thought, in 1661. It appeared around 35 years later, 31 years later, in England, when the Bank of England, 1694, issued paper money, paper banknotes that were basically debt in motion. Before the British Central Bank did it, all money had a positive value. All money was a form of savings. All money had intrinsic value, or at least could be converted to it, until the British came up with their little Ponzi scheme. The bankers, they loaned the money to the governments. As long as the governments could pay it back, they were loaning it to England, which took this idea of credit and ran with it, basically beat the rest of the world in submission. This is what we call imperialism. This is how England, this is how all you people who are addicted to, what was that show? I forget the name of it, but it gets away from me. It was the one that, with all these rich British lords, and this is what they did. It was all built on credit. And credit is a wonderful thing until it can't be paid back. And now, 300 years after the British did this, they pulled the scheme on. They knew that the British Empire was no longer expanding fast enough because constantly debt in motion has to constantly expand, so the constantly compounding debts can be paid off. When the British Empire could no longer expand as it had, they took their Ponzi scheme, stuck it in New York in the United States with the Federal Reserve System. The Americans took it off to the horses and ran, except they didn't quite have the same respect for it that the British bankers did. And 20 years after the Ponzi scheme came to the United States, the American bankers blew it up with the Great Depression. Hitler came along, blew out all the debts, gave the Ponzi scheme another life after World War II, and now, after 60 years, the Americans have blown it up again, expanding it to the rest of the world, and now the Chinese are finishing the coup d'etat to paper money. That's basically deconstructing paper money, or deconstructing money. In this program, I'm going to deconstruct reality. Now, how is reality created? And unlike paper money, which are issued by governments now, all right, reality, it's issued by each and every one of us. It's far more, quote, democratic. Now, how is reality constructed? Because if I'm going to deconstruct it, the first thing that I have to do is explain to you how reality is constructed. Well, here it is. Can you see this? This is a CD, all right? This is how reality is constructed. When each of us is born, we have a blank CD running. All right? A bunch of memory, empty memory. All right? And when each of us is born, this CD, this personal disc, starts being filled with your observations, with your experiences, with your judgments. Everyone's is different. This may be yours. This may be your sister's, or your mother's, or someone else's. All right? It starts out with one, yours. But this CD goes and finds itself in an ocean of other CDs. Far different, far more. But they're all constructed the same way. So when I talk to you about how to deconstruct reality, we first have to talk about how reality is constructed. And it happens at the individual level. Each person begins to build their own, what I call, personal operating system. All right? And your personal operating system, it's put in there with all your experiences. All right? If you're an orphan, your experiences are real different than people who are born with a father and mother. All right? If your father and mother are brutal, selfish, mean, controlling, your experience and your CD is very different than the person whose CD is filled with loving, supportive experiences. All right? If you are born in a time of a Great Depression and a crisis, your CD, your personal operating system, your memory bank is filled with totally different experiences than people born in different situations. All right? This is how reality is constructed. Individual by individual. Later on, you find out that what it is that your CD, your reality, is only one of many, many, many millions, billions, all right? And it started out with what? Yours. But what do all these have in common? They are a collection of the database of experiences, judgments, ultimately beliefs that each one of us has. Now, what does this do? This explains reality to you. Your disc explains to you the world. Now, if you're a woman, your disc explains to you the world in quite a different way than if you're a man. Why? Because the experiences, the judgments are filtered gender-wise. Now, if you're transgendered, very different. If you're gay, slightly different. All right? And different enough, but that's what they are. And to each person, that disc is a 100% reflection to them of what we call reality. Every person, every individual, their disc reflects to them a world that is a 100% reflection of their beliefs, judgments, ideology, etc. At a certain point, this collection of beliefs believed, in the West at least, that the world was flat. All right? In South America, with the indigenous people, they didn't believe the world was flat. I don't know if they had any judgments about it, but they knew it circulated, it was like this, it was cycles, it was round and round and round. The idea of it being flat was only accepted in Western Europe. But because everybody in Western Europe, it became a belief that the world was flat. Oh, the world's flat. Well, I want to tell you something. It isn't. Now, why do you know it isn't? Ha! For the same reason the people back then thought it was flat. You were told it. You were told it, and you bought it as a part of the disc that came off the shelf. Most of what you believe about reality is off the shelf. If you were in the South at this time, 2013 or 14, the chances are, or at least, especially in 1950, your disc, and you were white, it said God, Southern Baptist, that was a part of your disc. You were born with it, and you believed to an extraordinary degree that it was what you call, isn't that what you call it? The gospel truth. If, however, you were born in the Middle East during this time, in Pakistan, what was your disc that you have? Muhammad, Muslim. You believed it was the gospel truth, or the Quran, the prophet. So what you believe the truth to be is basically location, 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 and the times in which you grew up. All right? Now, this is you, or who you think you are. In the construction of reality, each one of us has one of these, and it explains to us what reality is. It's like going to a foreign film, and this is running in the background constantly, constantly, constantly. And that foreign film, just like it has subtitles, explaining to you what's going on and who these people are, your film, your subtitle is telling you what it is. To a Democrat, the picture of Obama brings up totally different subtitles than to the Republicans. And so it is with Bush, Reagan, Clinton. Each one of you is running a separate program that is explaining to you what is going on out there. Fundamentalist religion. They bought their books off the shelf. Each one of you has it. Each one of you has this disc that gives your world meaning, substance, belief, and security. And very few of you ever challenge or question what is on your disc. Why? Because growing up in a world where it's basically a vacuum, far beyond your ability to understand, the first thing you do is you just grab onto whatever beliefs are being passed around, or being sold, or being forced upon you. All right? And these beliefs change with the times. In China, in the 1920s, it was chaos. But by the 1950s, the communists had taken control and everyone was mouthing Mao Zedong, socialism, Marxism. I don't know how well they understood it, but it was a part of that disc. But that was no different than in the United States when the Republicans were selling Reagan free markets. Just another disc. A disc that somehow served the times and the people who were dishing it out. There was a movie that came by 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I'm not sure. It's called The Matrix. The Matrix was extraordinary in the sense that it talked about this disc, but from a different way. Because when you're in here, you're sort of trapped. You don't even know what you're trapped by. But what you really are is you're trapped by this disc. Now, other people, see this? This is a stack of discs. All right? This disc here, this stack of discs, this one I'm spinning around, the one on top, let's say that's the United States. So these are all Americans. And their discs sort of resemble each other. Not that they all do, because if you're in America, you know that people in the South have a different disc generally than people in the North. Women do. People go to church have a different disc. Black people, Mexicans. The disc in the United States is quite varied, much more than other discs. The Japanese section down here is much more stratified. Much more stratified. The mindset in Japan is much more homogeneous than the mindset on top of the United States. All right? Now, why do you have this disc? Now, everybody, I want to explain to you something about the disc. Everybody has got one, and everybody does, thinks that their disc is right. I mean, let's use some critical thinking. Don't you think you're right about what you believe, what you perceive, what you say, what you promulgate? Well, I want to tell you, I don't know who's sitting next to you, but that person, you may be married to him. That person may think, actually, whether they say it or not, you're full of shit. And especially so if they've been married to you for more than 20 years. They may not think you're full of shit out loud or in all areas. In some areas, they may believe just like you. Their disc and your disc may coincide on certain things. All right? But that's how it operates. Everybody's got a disc. Everybody's disc has certain things on it. Everybody believes their disc. And everybody's disc reflects back to them the beliefs that are on this disc. You think that you're walking around in an objective world. I love those people, they say, oh, they call themselves objectivists, that there's something out there that exists purely and simply without their perception. What a crock of whatever it is. It doesn't. Or it may. But to say that the subjective reality has nothing to do with it, that's hubris to an extreme degree. All right? It's what you believe and what you feel and what you project that is projected back out to you. If you believe a certain kind of people are wrong, whether it's religious, racial, or gender, you will notice everything they do wrong. If you admire a certain person, everything they do is right. Those who admire Ronald Reagan have the same kind of admiration for that man as those who admire Bill Clinton, for entirely different reasons. And sometimes you may be right, sometimes you may be wrong. But both of you think you're right. Why? Because you got one of these. And this one of these says, I am right. Well, are you? No. You just think you are. You just think you are. You know, I was in the Haight-Ashbury, and I had a friend there. We went our separate ways. He became a born-again Christian. And he used to come visit us in Berkeley. And you could see sort of his attitude that, well, you know, he knew he was right, and we were still those crazy people that he used to be one of a few years before. And I know he prayed about us because he liked us. I don't know if he loved us, but he liked us a lot. He felt the camaraderie, but he felt that he had found the right path. All right? And you could feel it from him. Yeah, self-righteousness, all right? I don't know how you Christian... You know, Jesus said, you can know my followers. You will know my followers. Well, if people took a poll out there in the United States and said what they thought of Christians, I don't think that's what Christ thought that he was going to create. All right? And he didn't create it. People did, using his name to cloak themselves in that. All right? To justify their own beliefs, their own projections. This is what everybody does. This is what Marxists do. This is what socialists do. This is what free market people do. Yes, any belief that's on your disk is going to reflect that somehow you are right. Irrespective of whether you believe this 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, but you believe it now. All right? Well, I wrote this friend of mine a letter. He's born-again Christian. Recently born again, probably 4 or 5 years. And I said, dear blah, blah, blah. I said, you know, I look back at my life and I can't even remember how many different points of view I had since I've known you. And I said, but the one thing that really makes me feel good is, no matter what my point of view was, I thought I was right. And it's wonderful knowing that my being right is no longer dependent, and is not dependent on something as transitory and as ephemeral as a point of view. I'm sure he read it because he was a lot easier when he came to visit the next time. All right? And this is really what it is. That this disc that we call reality is only a disc of memories, judgments, beliefs. No matter how strongly we believe it, no matter how much we're willing to kill somebody who has a different disc than us, no matter how far we're willing to go to the wall, no matter how pious we are, it's only a disc. And just as that paper money is no longer money, it's debt in motion, this disc is not you. There is a you very separate from this disc. There is a you far bigger than this disc that you have no idea of. But it knows who you are. And someday you will too. The deconstruction of money is fascinating because at this time money plays such a large part in our lives and what's happening to us. But the deconstruction of reality is even more important because at this time the deconstruction of reality is also going through a tremendous change and shift. Because just like money is highly unstable, so is its egoic frame of reference increasingly unstable. Because the discs don't do well in times of change. Because the ego wants to stabilize the beliefs and hold on to it. And those of you who are holding on to those beliefs, with every fiber of your being, are being met with a pressure that is going to rip your fingers away from them. But in that lies your, quote, dare I say the word, salvation. It is going to claim its own. Your small world is about to be ripped away into one much bigger. We all resist change. We fight it in our own ways as best we can. But if we had our choice, we'd still be 5 years old at the birthday party we didn't want to leave when our parents came to pick us up. But let me assure you, I know for a truth, no matter if you're an atheist, a Muslim, a Christian, a fundamentalist, or whatever you believe, you're not at that birthday party anymore. No, you aren't. You're a long way down that path, and that path doesn't end. And it's going to take you to a place where you are going to find out who you really, really are.